Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is all about moisture meters, but even more than that, it's about wood. And I want to thank the nice folks at Wagner Meters who have helped provide me with some of the information that I've used in this video. Now, when we use wood, people talk about wood movement, and one of the ways that we measure it is with moisture meters. There's pin type, there's surface type. Today I'm going to tell you which one's best for whatever application you're using. So let's jump right in. I always say that knowing the moisture content of the wood that you're using is fundamental to woodworking, because only then can you plan exactly when and how to use the wood. So let me show you some examples. Now, when we go to a lumber store, we have two choices of lumber that we can purchase. We can purchase softwood, which is typically called SPF, which is spruce, pine, fir, or we can buy hardwoods. Typically, we would be getting these at a specialty wood store. And within the hardwoods, there's also exotic hardwoods. So we'll talk about that in a second. So let's talk about softwood. Typically, these are sold by Lowe's and Home Depot and all of the independent lumber stores. This lumber, when it's sent to a lumber store, it has to be kiln dried. It's an industry standard. It needs to be kiln dried. And the reason for that is they want to kill all the bugs in the lumber so that when a house or garage or building is constructed, these little bugs are not going to come out and start eating the wood. So it's kiln dried to around 18 or 19%. That is still very wet wood. When you're doing house construction, wet wood is okay because the 2x4s don't shrink. They might get a little bit less in size, thickness, or in width, but that doesn't matter when you're constructing a house. The main thing is the 2x4 doesn't really get any shorter when it shrinks. Now, when you're buying hardwood for picture frames, maybe for cutting boards, for furniture, all sorts of things like that. You don't want that furniture to be shrinking because it's a much smaller kind of article that you're looking for. It's not like a big house. So you want to be very careful with the moisture content in that wood because you don't want it to shrink and deform, and you need it to be stable. So when you purchase lumber and it's fairly wet, it's still going to need to dry. And what happens to some woods, some boards, when it dries is if sometimes there's built-in tensions in the wood, and that can make it warp or bow or arch or twist, just like this one. Or if it dries, sometimes if it dries too fast, it can crack. Those are some of the problems that will happen. And if the wood, as it's shrinking, if you've used wet wood in some joinery, maybe picture frames or maybe a small cabinet or a table, and the wood is shrinking, the joints can show gaps in there where you've worked very hard to make nice tight joints, and all of a sudden the joints are showing because the wood has shrunk. So those are some of the things we want to avoid is in the shrinkage, is that warping, cracking, and as I mentioned in the last video, you can actually trap, depending on the finish that you're using, if your wood is too wet, you can actually trap moisture in the wood. And especially in things like varnish or polyurethanes, it can't escape and it will stay in there, and it looks like the finish is fogged. It's not. It's moisture trapped in your wood. The next question I get asked frequently is, where does the wood expand and contract? So if wood's wet, it will shrink. If wood is dry, it can absorb moisture if the moisture in the air is more. And as I mentioned earlier, in the what's called the longitude of the wood, there's very little shrinkage in the longitude, almost immeasurable. Where there is moderate shrinkage or expansion is in the radial, and that the radius is like a radius of a circle. Where there's a lot of movement is in what's called the tangicle, and tangicle is cross. And you can imagine a tree that's growing is expanding, and that's where it's going to want to expand. So if it's cut and it wants to expand, there's where, or shrink, there's where the most movement is going to be. The next question I get asked quite frequently is, what is the moisture content that I should have? What wood moisture content is best for my area? I'm glad you asked that question, because these charts are all over the internet. I'll put a link to the one that I put in the article on Woodwork Web. Let me show you a close-up and explain how you figure that out. Very easy. So what I have here is something called the equilibrium wood moisture content. And again, these are available all over the internet. You can go and look up these charts. It's well known. And the way this works, across the top is relative humidity. So that's the amount of moisture in the air. And you can go to a weather network and it will tell you what the humidity in the air is in your neighborhood. Temperature, right here. You've all got thermometers somewhere. So where I live, particularly inside the house, for example, if I'm making furniture, I use 70 degrees. It's give or take a little bit depending on the time of year, but 70 degrees. And the relative humidity in the air is very often around 65. So if you live in the Pacific Northwest, Seattle, Portland, Vancouver area, 70 degrees at 65%, that gives me 12%. Now that 12 moisture reading of 12, what that means is at 12 the wood will not absorb moisture and it won't give off moisture, so it's stable. But if you lived in New Mexico, for example, and when I've heard from some subscribers there, you may have a temperature closer to 80, sort of an average temperature, maybe 80, and I know the relative humidity is very low there. I'm going to pick 25. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm going to pick 25 at 80. That means your moisture content down there is going to be 5.3. It's less than half of what I would have up here. There are two basic forms of moisture meter. This is called a pin type because it has two sharp pins at the front. And the way it works is you drive it into the wood, twist the knob here until the light comes on, and that will tell you the moisture meter of the wood, or the moisture content of the wood. And these are great for firewood, for rough pieces of wood, because you can drive it into the wood that way. The second type is a surface reading. There's a pad on the back, and once you turn the meter on and lay it on the wood, it will give you a moisture reading of what that wood is. So you can actually, with some of these, you can actually vary the depth of reading that you get, which is even more accurate. Okay, so let's start off checking these meters and see what kind of readings we get with them. So I've got the pin meter here, and I'm going to put it in this clear area up top here, and I'm going to drive the pins in as far as I can and just start turning it till the red light goes on, and that's come on at about 10%. Okay, turn that off now, and now I'm going to put the surface reader on. I'm going to use it in the same area. And whoa, I get 17%. I'm in the same area, the pad's in the same area, 17.7. That's a lot. 10 to 17, that's a big difference. So let's find out what happened here. This is only gone in so far, and I'm going to show you what you can do to change this reading here with this meter. So I can see the holes that this meter left, and I'm going to drive some finishing nails into there. I just want to check that they're the right setting. Okay. Now I'm going to put a jumper on that, and on the meter. And now that I'm actually reading inside the board, there's 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, look at that, 18%. So the surface reader was actually right. This is wrong because I can't drive these pins far enough into the wood to get an accurate reading. Okay, let's take the surface reader and see what we get now when we scan the entire board. So I'm going to start off up here. Oh, look at that. I'm getting up 20%. 20% up there. But when I move around, now it goes down to 18, 17, which is what we were getting here. 17, 16. We got a 32 in here. There's some knots in there. So 15, 16. So most of it is around 16%. But why am I getting 20% up in this corner? Well, this is why we read the entire board, because, and I did this on purpose, because look at, when I flip this around, that corner that was up there, that's there, it's a pitch pocket. So I'm getting a faulty reading because there's a bunch of moisture pitch in this area. And if that was the only reading I took on this board, I would think the whole board is 20%, but it's not. Most of it is 15 or 16%. So I want to take a moment and just talk briefly about this surface meter. So it comes in this nice little case, and inside here is a calibration stand. I'm going to show you in a minute how simple that is to use. The meter itself basically is an off-on button right here. You touch it, it turns on, does some internal checking, then it goes to 0. To turn it off, if you leave it for a few minutes, it turns off automatically, or if you hold the button, you can turn it off. So when you turn it on, you want to tell the meter what kind of wood you're using, and that's the species setting. You just hit that button right there, and it comes with a little manual, and it shows all of the species in the manual, and it's just a number. 48 is fir, 41 is alder. Whoops, go down there. Well, there's 50. Then I lock it in, and that's that species already set there. I can change that easily. Going to go down to 41 for alder. There it is. Lock it in. That's done. The other thing that it does that most meters don't do is some of these meters have a feature for the depth, and you can set the depth to 3/4 of an inch. So if you're using thick wood and you want to measure deep into it, you can use the 3/4. Or if you're using 3/4 inch wood, you just want to measure under the surface, so 1/4 inch, and then you lock it in the same way. When you're finished, you turn the meter off, and all you do is lay it on the wood. And in this case, I'm just going to lay it on my hand, and my hand comes up to a 32% moisture content. When you're finished, just hold that and turn it off. And it's that simple. That's all you need to know. Let me show you how to use the calibration. This is one of the features I like the best on these meters. So with this calibration stand, and if I bump the meter or if I drop it, which I have on occasion, I like to double check to make sure that my readings are still good. So this is raised a little bit so it actually fits in that indentation in there. You turn it on, and now you hit the species button until you get, I don't know if you'll be able to see, but there's a CR that comes up in there. And that's or a cal for calibration. I don't know if you'll be able to see that. If I turn it up, you'll be able to see cal. Okay. Then you push the audio button 3 times. And now the meter goes in and it does some jiggery pokery inside. And now it says lift. So I lift it off and I hold it up in the air, and then it says done. And that's it. That has recalibrated that meter. It is that simple. Well, there's lots of things that I didn't cover here, and that's why I'm going to remind you to go to Woodwork Web, because there's things there that I don't cover off everything in these videos. For example, this little species manual, you don't have to pack that around with you. You can download a file onto your phone. So if you're at the wood store and you see some sort of wood that you haven't thought about before, you can actually look that up online. And what I do is a little cheat sheet on the back of mine. I have some little labels for the about 6 of the most common woods that I use, and I put the little files on the back for the species machine. But you know, as woodworkers, we spend thousands of dollars on track saws and domino cutters and fancy sanding machines, and I am stunned by how many serious good woodworkers I meet out there who don't have any kind of a moisture meter. Wood is our primary element that we work with. We need to understand the moisture content of it if we're going to turn out decent quality work. So I encourage you to go to Woodwork Web, have a look at the article there. Lots of good stuff there. And check out the Wagner site. Honestly, they have tons of excellent information there. Go and check out the lineup of moisture meters. I encourage you, if you're having a look at one, get one that has a dual setting purpose, dual depth setting. You will not be sorry that you got more information on the wood that you're using. I'm Colin Canet for Woodwork Web. Thanks for watching.